she has this incredible story, and we're looking for places to share the story. So immediately I thought, well, what about Fellowship Friday? And then it dawned on us that Friday that you would be here is Good Friday. And so the first person I called was Sue. And I said, Sue, could we do a Fellowship Friday here? And I told her what this was about, and very quickly got the thumbs up. Thank you, Father John. So Jen says, I'm going to send you the book. So a couple days later, I had the book in the mail. And I took 2 books with me on the cruise, and this was one of them. And I didn't stop. I was cover to cover. And from the moment I read it, I've looked forward to this day and to meeting you, because you blow me away. You are incredible. This is Karen, but her friends call her Carrie, so I'm going to call her Carrie. Ascarali, is that the right pronunciation? And her mom, Lynette, and what's your last name? Cinnamon. I should have known that. I'm sorry. They're from Trinidad, Tobago. Anybody who wonders where that is, it's just off the coast of Venezuela, kind of in the northern part of the continent. Probably a several-hour boat ride from here, a couple-hour plane ride. And you're from a town called San Fernando.
That's right.
And so Carrie and Lynette are up here for a few more days. They've been here for a few days. And just absolutely, what a privilege to be able to interview you and introduce you to some folks, and to walk you through your incredible journey. And the story we're sharing is fresh. It's just a little over 2 years. And so, we sat out there. One of the first questions I wanted to find out from Carrie, I said, you're a very courageous person. Why? Why did you write this and in it be very transparent? And we'll talk about that a little bit. But what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Carrie's story, and then at the end, if you have some questions, obviously you'll have plenty of questions. So Carrie will answer them. Now, if you can't, she's going to talk as loud as she can, but if you can't hear, move forward. That's okay. If we want to have a group up front, we can. Yeah, just all kind of group up. So anyhow, so Carrie, before we talk about the day and forward, let's go back. Tell us about your childhood. Did you have faith as a child? Go to church?
Okay, before I answer that, I'd just like to say good morning to everyone, and a special thank you to these people for having me here this morning, and special thank you to you as well. Yes, I did grow up in a home where I was encouraged in faith, encouraged to worship God. I attended a Presbyterian church in my country. It's the largest Presbyterian church, and I was very active in church. I would belong to most of the groups that we had. I was in the church choir. I was in a women's group, a girls group, the Brownies, something called TGIT, which is, I can't remember the name. Trinidad Girls in Training, that's what it was. I was small, I was like 8 years old at the time, which is many, many, many years ago. Yeah, so yes, faith has always been a big part of my life. Not just going to church, but praying and talking to God throughout the day, or at all times, for everything, no matter how small or insignificant it may have seemed.
As you grew up, there was kind of this tipping point, a very dark time in your life, in your family's life. Your dad passed away.
Yeah.
Share with us some of that.
Before I go to that part, I'll just nice picture of myself going to church and praying. But as soon as I was old enough, well, in our country, we are kept as children for a longer time than your children are kept as children. So at the age of 18, when I was able to make my own choices, I stopped going to church. It doesn't mean that I stopped believing, it didn't mean that I stopped praying, but I stopped going to church. I lost faith in the church, not in God. And for many years it continued like that until approximately 5 to 6 years ago, my dad got sick. And he actually was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. We didn't know that until it was close to his death. It happened, and within 2 months' time, he passed away. But it was a very traumatic time for us, because I think you need to understand that I am the only daughter for my parents. I have 2 brothers, and I was extremely close to my father. When he got ill, it was very difficult to deal with his illness, to see my father, who I viewed as being a very strong person, the person who I depended on for a lot of things, and he would now lie helpless in the bed. There was nothing anybody could do, apparently, and he would soon pass away. It left my family torn apart, devastated. I felt that, there was more that we should have done for him, but that we didn't do. Obviously, that really wasn't the truth, but that's how I perceived it at the time. And when he did eventually pass away, I sort of cut myself off from my family, so that I no longer spoke to my mother nor my brothers. And the only person I kept in touch with was my son. I didn't even keep in touch with Din or anybody else in the family. It was just my son and I after that. And
by the way, we should mention, Din and Lynette are brother and sister.
Brother and sister. So Din is actually younger than I am, but he's also my uncle.
That's plausible. So there was that estrangement, but sometime in 2012, there was a reconciliation. How did that happen, Lynette?
In 2012, well,
I'm assuming it was
God,
2012.
yes, God works in mysterious ways. When this happened, like she said, she is my only daughter. So you don't have another daughter to confide in or do anything. But always, my prayer was for family reconciliation. Always. But God works in strange ways. And the year after my husband passed on, I decided to make a trip to Jerusalem. And just prior to that trip, there was this freak car accident right in front of my home, where my son's car, I actually saw it rolling, coming towards me. Instinctively, I pushed up my hand to stop the car. Don't ask me why, but it blew me away, and that was the start of the reconciliation. I had to be laid up. She knew about it, and she would call, didn't come to visit or anything, but God works in His time and in His way. And despite the situation, I have never stopped trusting that it will always work out for good, as far as He is concerned.
The reconciliation turned out to be very, very important because of the events of January 29th of 2013, having a family that was back together, talking, interacting. You wouldn't have been able to make it through
I don't think
your
I would
ordeal
have.
without family.
No.
So,
I should mention even at this point, in 2012, in May of 2012, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So that even, it was a bad thing, as the world would see it. But God was using that for more healing, you know. So even when her incident took place, I was halfway through chemotherapy.
We all can remember certain dates. My folks' generation remembers Pearl Harbor. I remember where I was and the whole day when found out that President Kennedy was assassinated. We all can remember where we were on 9/11. And Carrie, you remember where you were on January 29th. You were in Trinidad, Tobago. You were leaving. You would come back through San Fernando. You wanted to go home. You had stopped to make a turn to go home. And what you didn't realize is you had ended up in a combat zone where there were individuals who were attacking different people to rob them, hurt them, and you were shot. Tell us about that. Where were you shot?
I'll tell you that story. So that was on Tuesday, I remember the day. It was Tuesday the 29th of January 2013. It was the evening before my brother's birthday. His birthday is the 30th of January. And I just went for a drive. And what we did was I wanted to go back home, so we had to stop and make a turn from a minor road onto a major road. So what that means is that we have to stop before we proceed. And it doesn't have to be a long stop because there really wasn't that much traffic, but I had to stop. And in stopping, the evening that was quite peaceful before suddenly changed. And as I think I wrote in the book, and as I always say, it was just as it is in the movies when you're looking at a movie and the background music changes and you realize that something is developing, and that's how it felt for me at that time. And I realized that something was wrong in that instant. Now, I can only tell it in sequence, but everything happened almost immediately. But I can tell you it sequentially. So I looked to my left and I saw a figure, a dark shadow, standing right outside the window. And I don't know how I knew, but I knew something was going to happen. And so I moved to protect myself. And in moving, I heard a very loud noise. I describe it as fireworks. But what was really happening, I thought that someone had taken a piece of lumber, a piece of wood, and hit the car glass. But what it was is that he shot in trying to get to the driver so that they could take the car. What was happening that night is that these were some burglars, robbers, thieves, bandits, whatever you want to call them. They had committed quite a few crimes before. They did some shooting before, they did some stealing, they took cars before, and they were on the run from the police who were not too far behind them. And so they were looking to get a new getaway car, which would have been my car. And so they shot at me, and I was hit in the face and the chest and the shoulder. And immediately as that happened, I told you it was all at the same time. The driver realized what was happening and sped off. And so it was, as I told you in the movies, you were hearing gunshots ringing out, even as I was being taken away from the scene with blood pouring from my face, splinters all over on my face. When I felt it, it felt as though it was just blown away, completely blown away. That's how it felt.
And of course, we don't have the time to get into the entire story. That's why you get the book. We're there. We'll talk about that after a while. But you get to the hospital. It was kind of almost miraculous how you got there. You end up walking in on your own, and everybody was horrified at what they saw. Lynette, you got there a while later. Tell us, as a mom, you're seeing your daughter laying there.
Well, when I got the message, when that happened, nobody woke me up because I had a long day and I had just gone into bed. So when my son called to give me the message, he said, "Don't tell her anything because I was up in the north, about 40-something miles away. And he said she would want to come down home, but there's nothing she could let her sleep and come in the morning. So the first thing I was told morning is that she was shot and her face was blown away. The message I got, her face was blown away. I didn't hear chin or anything, so there, you imagine the picture I am getting. So with that, my sister-in-law said to me, you will not drive down, I will take you. So I didn't even have the time to concentrate on the drive. So I was sitting there, and I'm praying throughout, Lord, don't let her die. And let me have the courage to face that. You know, I didn't know what I was going to see. And I was just praying for the strength to have to cope with it. Needless to say, I met her Sunday, and I had to tell him, and I had to be strong for him. Now, I am not really someone who is a cry person. So I had to tell him, well, you know, when you're going there to see mom, she'll be looking at you. Don't cry, because she'll worry about you. And I'm saying that to him maybe to tell myself too, you know. Of course, when I got in there, the only place didn't have a tube was maybe her eyes. But everywhere else had tubes all over. I couldn't see the extent of the damage because this whole thing was in plaster. And I didn't know what to think because she couldn't say anything, she couldn't speak. Like I said, I didn't know what. But when I saw her lying here, it was such a helpless feeling that I didn't know what to think. And I was told she could be in there for about 4 to 5 months. So that is what greeted me. Her son, however, he was really crying. He was just shaking on me. And I kept whispering to him. And I was asking God to let him be strong. And I'm saying, look how mommy is looking. Pull yourself together, you know. I mean, but he's a child, you know, and he's an only child. So that is what we had to face.
Instead of 5 months, you were in ICU for 3 weeks.
I stayed in ICU for 3
Or
days.
3 days,
Yeah.
and then
And then 3
moved
weeks.
you into
Yeah.
the other room.
Yeah.
Again, in the book, Carrie describes a whole lot of those 3 weeks. Again, God bless you for your courage to be able to share that. It was a nightmare. I will share one thing, that you know, I had to take a deep breath. You had a tracheotomy.
Yeah.
The tracheotomy, for the most part, was there to keep her tongue from disappearing. I mean, that you really did not have a bottom part. Your jaw was
Totally fractured right across.
now, and to this day, you still have metal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you get through an airport?
Well, I
And do they
did.
believe you? Okay.
Yeah, it shows up.
All right, good. So, 3 weeks of hell, months of pain. August of 2013, you had a doctor who would do the plastic surgery. Tell us how you got the money together for that. Don, you'll appreciate this. Don sells medical insurance. So tell us how you got the money together to get the plastic surgery.
Well, as it was right throughout my situation, God was with me again. And at first I thought I would have to go through the public health system where I wouldn't have to pay. But they didn't have the capability to do the surgery. So I had no choice but to do it privately. And privately meant a lot of money. Getting the money meant I had to look at my resources. I'm a divorcee, a single parent. So I had just bought a house and a car, so resources, my savings were limited, which meant that I had to look beyond. And what happened was that my family stepped in. My mom and brothers gave me some money. My extended family, my mom's brothers and sisters came forward and they assisted. And my friends came forward. I sold my car. I have no car again. I had to sell the car. My friends did a fundraiser for me. So what they did was they had a film show, a cinema show, and they charged a lot more than the standard fee, and they collected those fees and they gave it to me. And that's how I was able to get the money to do the surgery.
So you share in your book that from lion to lamb, a spiritual journey. All things work together for good. And we know that while this was horrific, you went through the fire and you came out to the other end. And what you found was that the Beatitudes, you saw lessons over and over again from the Beatitudes. So I'd like to take a large section of time now and just ask for illustrations from the different Beatitudes that really spoke to you. And blessed are those, or blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
Yes, well, when I thought about that beatitude, there was one person who stood out in my mind who clearly illustrated that, and that was my father. Because poor in spirit meant that you don't think more of yourself than you are, and that you are willing to humble yourself and be good, embrace all people, and to mend bridges as far as possible, and to live at peace as far as possible. So there's a lot of overlap in the Beatitudes, but in this particular case, my father was that because he was the person, whenever there was any family, what you would call it, family conflict, my father is the one who would be bridging the gap between us. So that's what that beatitude meant to me.
Before we go to the next one, Lynette, you told me a story or an incident around that third week when you went into the hospital to see Carrie and she wasn't in her room. Would you tell that story?
Well, actually, it wasn't the third week. She went in on the Tuesday, and on the Saturday, when I went to ICU to visit with her, of course, I had to identify myself and say who the patient is. And the nurse, very, matter of fact, it said, she's not here. And it's only when I was telling you that just now, it was like when Mary went to the tomb, he's not here. But if he's not here, where is he? And where is she? So, seeing what I've been seeing, how she's hooked up, told me she would have to stay 3 or 4 months in ICU. And to be told she's not here, what would be your thoughts?
Yeah.
She's in the mortuary, and I'm like, well, if she's not here, where is she? And they said, well, okay, we sent her over to the ward, the main ward. So why did you send her? But all her vital signs were stabilized. So we sent her across the, But like I say, the initial thing was the worst has happened. But sometimes the human part of us, we really don't know how powerful our God is. He's really and truly the God of the impossible. And where we think that nothing can happen, it happens.
And we also should say that this hospital was not really equipped to handle everything that you needed, even to
situation proved to be a challenge for them, simply because I guess maybe because of how close the bandit was to me. So it was a close range shot, and the type of bullet that was used, it kind of exploded when it entered, so that there was so much shrapnel. And this particular area is a very sensitive area too. So they had to make sure before they could do any surgery, before they could think about reconstruction, they had to think about removing as much shrapnel as possible, because if they didn't do that, then I stood a chance of becoming infected even after surgery. And even that cleaning, it was almost impossible for them to do. And at one point, I think I would have mentioned it there, in trying to clean, they didn't do it the proper way, and they were just removing dead cells, I guess it would have been. And the doctor kept going and going and going, and at one point he was moved to remark, "Is she dead?" Because I wasn't responding at all. I wasn't even complaining that it was hurting or anything, and there he was cutting away and cutting away and cutting away. So the truth is that they really were not capable of handling the situation. They did their very best given what knowledge they did have and what equipment and supplies that they did have, but it wasn't the ideal situation. But it's still good.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted.
So, you know, the Beatitudes kind of lead into each other and kind of overlap. So the first one we talked about poor in spirit, and you know, you recognize that there's a need for God, there's a greater God than us. And once you recognize that, we start as human beings to long to reach to that stage that we can never reach to until we have passed on. And if, you know, it depends on what God's grace, that we'll be able to reach to that stage. So we're talking about mourning, we're talking about longing to be with Him, longing to be like Him, to follow in His example. So when I think of that, I thought about people who I know who have always been searching for God. You know, you spend your whole life seeking God, praising God, and anybody who looks at you is supposed to recognize that there is something in you that is different from other people, and they should look at you and want to be that way, to search for God as well.
And blessed are the meek, for they'll inherit the earth.
Yes, again, the meek sort of overlaps with the humble, and that's, a lot of people think that's where the name of the book came from lion to lamb, and they think that I just mean meek. And the thing is, people think of meek as a bad thing. You know, we all, in the world that we live in now, we all for ourselves, and we want to be aggressive and forward, and you know, we want to move forward in life, and we think that to do that, you cannot be meek because people are going to walk all over you. But there is strength in meekness. If you can be so meek that you can consider others to be better than yourself, then you are in fact very, very strong, because there's a certain strength that comes from knowing who you are and allowing others to shine forth as who they are. And that's, I thought about one person in particular, and it's, I'm a divorcee, as I told you, and the person who came to my mind was my former mother-in-law, because that's the kind of person that she was. She came to visit me, even though I'm no longer married to her son. She came to visit, and she would stand in the background, and she would massage. That was, you know, the one thing she felt that she could do to help make things better for me. So that's what Blessed Are the Meek stood for me.
Tell us about the first time after the incident where you stood in front of a mirror.
Yes, well, it took me about 2 to 3 weeks before I even thought about looking at myself in the mirror, because I knew what had happened. I'm not an idiot. You got shot in the face, yes, everything is going to be all damaged, and there were marks all over you won't believe it, but all of this was covered with black marks. It's much cleared up now. Apart from the black marks, everything was all swollen and damaged and all that. So the first day, 3 weeks after, I looked in the mirror and I was prepared for the worst. And when I looked in the mirror, I didn't focus on the damage. I was able, I don't know, through the grace of God, I was able to look directly into my own eyes and see myself as I know myself. And I was able to give thanks and praise to God and to acknowledge how awesome God is. That's what I did the first time.
I think you have to share with them what Randall said to you. And he looks at you.
Oh no, we didn't test for the book. They could read that one.
A teaser, folks. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be filled.
Yes, hunger and thirsting. I think we all know what that is at a physical level. And I came to know it more in a deeper way, in a physical and spiritual level. Physically, because I couldn't eat for almost a year. And spiritually, because during that time I had time to reflect so much. I was able to think about two women I know in particular, who when I saw these women, their whole life is just about worshiping God, praising God, reading His Word, knowing His Word, and imparting that to other people. And, I think about hungering and thirsting, that the same way you long, you're thirsty and you want something to drink, spiritually, we long for something more. Anytime you feel an emptiness in you, that is a longing for God, and you have to fill it with the right things.
There was a certain drink that is indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago that you longed to have, and you finally got it.
What if I remember, it's not indigenous. Am I thinking of the same drink?
Yeah, it's a beverage. Help us, Dan. There's
Maybe a
Oh,
that's it.
Milo. Yes, it's Milo. Yes. Oh my goodness, Milo. It's you have Ovaltine?
Yes.
It's something like Ovaltine, right? It's a chocolate malt drink, and I just longed for that because I couldn't drink. At one point in time, I couldn't even drink. So everything was just going directly to my stomach. So I would look at everybody else, and every time the service passed, and they would say, "Does anybody want some tea or a sandwich?" I would always just wave my hand, and that was a big joke for them because they knew I couldn't have anything.
Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy.
Yes, I'm speaking to you all, and I'm thinking I am so unworthy to be telling you all about the Beatitudes, but for me, blessed are the merciful. We have to recognize that we are all sinners, and therefore we can't act as judges for anybody else. So that's why we have to be merciful to others in the sense that we forgive and we understand, and we know that we will all make mistakes, so that even though someone else's mistake might be a very big mistake, we have to be trying all the time. And I say trying because we are human and we will fail, but we have to always try to forgive. And that brought to mind to me my neighbor. We knew each other just about 7 years when this happened, and she's a little older than my mom is, but she became my second mom in the time that she knew me, and that came about because of her, because she was merciful. She would be so willing to forgive all the time. Even, you could do whatever, and she is what brought to mind, she personified for me the Beatitudes.
And going back to the fact that the hospital, while well-meaning, was unprepared, and oftentimes they could have done things better. And so there was a lot of forgiveness.
Oh yes, there also that, yes, because there were times when, for example, that one time when one of the nurses asked me to do something which involved a bit of medical expertise, I felt, but she wanted me to do it for myself, and I just didn't want to. But I had no choice but to forgive her for asking me and to try to move past that.
Sure. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
Yes, pure in heart. How many of us can claim to really be pure in heart? And I mean, do we really even know what pure in heart is? And it's so very strange, but the one person who came to my mind who best illustrated pure in heart was my ex-husband, my son's father. Because although we have been divorced for many years, at least 20 years maybe, you meet him and immediately you think pure in heart, because you think truth, you think goodness, you see his light shining. And that's what it meant for me.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God.
Yes, the peacemakers. Peacemakers are those people, again, who are constantly trying to forgive and be good and make peace in this world. I don't remember at this time.
That's okay. And blessed are they who are persecuted for righteousness' sake.
Okay, so without meaning to make myself more than I am, that one applied. I felt I could have applied it to my life, because I am now like a lamb, meek and nice and humble. But before this, in my heyday, so to speak, well, I was a teacher. I was a chemistry teacher, and as a teacher, you have to be assertive. You have to lay down the ground rules. You have to be able to stand up for what is right and what is wrong. You have to know what it is, first of all. And as a teacher, in doing that, I came across as an arrogant, aggressive person. And despite that, I shouldn't say despite that, but I came across like that because I was constantly standing up for what I believed in and what was right. And that, coupled with the fact that, I felt I was trying to bring someone to God, I think that's why this happened to me. And that's where I think it personifies that particular beatitude.
What's amazing is that you came up in the church. Well, you didn't leave the faith. You left the church community, left the family community, but God brought you back, and that again through this horrific incident has given you a deeper faith and has shown you examples of his love for us. That, I think of Johnny Erickson Tata, that nobody really knew who she was until she jumped off a cliff and broke her neck, and as a quadriplegic has done more for the kingdom of God than many would ever think of doing. So it's ministry in adversity. I have two last questions, and one I asked Din to prepare you for, because I didn't want to blindside you with the question, and the other one I shared with you this morning because I didn't want to blindside you with that one either. In the book, you don't talk about forgiving the assailant. And you should know that the assailant was never brought to justice for this crime, though many think that he and others were killed in a subsequent shootout with the police. Through this situation, whether he's alive or dead, have you been able to forgive him?
Yes, I have been able. I can see that very honestly, very openly, I have been able to forgive, and that forgiveness came quite early, even while I lay in the hospital. I believe that there is good and there is bad, and I believe that whoever did this to me, they didn't have the benefit that I had of knowing God, and that's why that happened. And that's why I am able to forgive them. And if I can't forgive, I can't help anybody else or bring anybody else to God, and that's why I have forgiven.
You're a stronger person than me.
I don't think so. You're not in the situation. You would probably do better than I would.
No, folks know me. You're right. Not there. Not there at all. Final question, then I'm going to open it up for questions. And really, it's not a question. It's asking you to do something. Again, you were never able to look at that person face to face and say something to them. You've forgiven them, but you've never been able to actually look eye to eye and tell them something. Assume for a second that I was the assailant. What would you want to tell me? What would you want to tell the assailant?
Well, I'd like to know why. Why me? That's only human. But I would also like to let you know that that you don't have to be this way. You don't have to go around hurting people. That there is a God. There is a God who loves you and whose love can touch you in such a way that you will have no need to want to hurt people, and that you need to change your life around. That's basically what I would have to say.
That's powerful. To be able to sit in front of people that you've never met and share something so personal, so it's still so fresh. I thank you. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to open it up for questions. Any questions for Carrie, Lynette? Comments?
I do. Carrie, when you were recovering, I mean, it's just an amazing story. What was it that made you decide that you wanted to put this in print for people to be able to see? And what was the message that your heart wanted to convey?
Well, I didn't set out to write a book, but I needed to find an outlet for whatever feelings I had, and I had to find a way to deal with the situation. Because quite frankly, if I didn't do that, I don't think I'd be able to face or to move on. And so what I did was, I didn't want to tell my mom or my friends or even a pastor, because I wasn't close to any pastor. I didn't want to tell anybody what I was feeling because it was very, very personal, and some of it may not have been all that nice, so I'm like you in some ways. And so I started writing on bits of paper, which I would throw away to make sure that nobody else saw it, because I didn't want them dealing with that. It would prevent them from being able to help me to get back on my feet. And I had a blog, which I had started years ago, and I never really wrote on it, but I started writing on it. And so something began to emerge, and I saw that there was a possibility for a book. And that would have been sometime in probably about 6 months after the incident. And I got to a stage where I didn't know what to do with it, and I realized, well, okay, I'll just put this aside, it doesn't make sense. And then last year, January, it would have been, I call it through divine intervention is the word I'm looking for. Through, you have to excuse me, since since the blow, I have been a bit less quick as I used to be. But through divine intervention, I think that's where this book came about, so that I didn't use what I had before I started. I got up one morning. It all happened within the space of about a week and a half that I was able to put this together. And I was told quite clearly that I had to do the book using the Beatitudes as my guideline to bring out the essence of the Beatitudes. So it's spiritual, but it's not very technical in terms of
It's practical.
it's a practical application. Yes.
Yeah. Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Larry?
I commend you for your courage, first of all. When you were shot and you were in the hospital and things were so bad, did you deal with the question of death? And if you did, how did you work through that?
Yes, I knew how bad it was, even from the time that it happened. So I did have to deal with that question. Momentarily, at one time, I did think of giving up, and one of the nurses there kind of brought me back to reality. She said, no, you can't die now. After all we've done for you, you can't die.
You're ungrateful.
Yeah, I was so ungrateful, you know. So, yeah, with that, I said, okay, oh, sure, okay, no problem. Just like that. But to be honest with you, given the situation, dying really wasn't something that I thought about. I focused on living and on positive things.
And the amazing thing is dying was actually, in those first few hours, a real possibility because you had lost a tremendous amount of blood.
Yes, it was.
I mean, just on the way to the hospital.
Yeah, just on the way. And this is what I was saying. I was trying not to say too much because you told me not to give out too much.
No, it's in the book.
It's in the book. But the truth is that even at that point when blood was gushing out, it's like you turn on your tap, the most that it could come out and it was just pouring out. But I never screamed, I didn't panic, you know, I started right away. I think I went into what I call survival mode. And everything just shut down and I sat very quietly all the way to the hospital simply because I knew that to do otherwise would mean to let go of life. And I didn't want to do that.
Another question.
Is your book available in ebook?
Yes, it is on Amazon.
How old's your son and how's he coping with all of this?
Well, when my mom was talking, I'm sure you all picture a little child, but my son, he turned 24 this year. So when it happened, he would have been 22 years old. But even though he's 24, as I told you all, our culture is different from yours. So at age 24, my son is my baby son. Yes, and he's very tall and he's very big, but he is what I call a gentle giant. And he is, at the time, it was very, very, very difficult for him, but he has also come a very long way. Thank you for asking.
Will you be able to go back to the place where you had the accident?
Such a good question. This is the first time someone actually asked me that, and yes, I did. My mom, unknowingly, she didn't know exactly where it happened. One night, she took me for a drive. We went by somebody. Actually, it was to collect money from sales of the tickets for the fundraiser for me. And she was passing there, and yes, it was quite a traumatic experience. She didn't know what was happening because I didn't tell her. But I sat, gripped onto the car. I got physically ill. And yes, that was, right now I'm shaking just thinking about it. That was a terrible time. Yeah. Thank you again for asking.
Any other questions?
Did you feel, even though that you had left the church but were still connected to God, did you feel like you had a fairly strong prayer life before this happened?
Yes, I would say that. I felt that even as a child. I always felt I was, and I really mean this with no sense of self or anything, but I always felt I was special, a special child of God. I'm sorry to put it that way. I don't think I'm better than anybody else, but I always knew I had that link. I knew if something was going wrong, that I could ask God and talk to Him, and He would always be there.
Lynette, how are you now on your cancer journey?
It is a journey, because, but like I say, there is one day that is already written when I will exit this earth. I'm not going to fast forward, neither am I going to replay. So I take everything as it happens and I cope with it. Actually, when I was diagnosed and had a mastectomy done, I had it done on a Monday, and the Tuesday morning when the surgeon passed around, I said to him, I think I made a mistake. And he said, why, you should not have done the surgery? And I said, no, I should have taken out both at my age. And then, some time ago, I went doing routine thing, checks, mammogram and scans, and they seemed to have felt there was a lump on the other side. And I said, Lord, no, not now. You know, and I went, they asked me to repeat it. And all the while that they were doing their test, I was lying there praying. And with 3 young female doctors, and they said to me, you know, you are very good, you're a good patient, you didn't give us any trouble. I said, well, why should I give trouble? I was busy communicating, but of course I didn't say that to them. You know, it turns out where every results came back, and everything was normal, was good, no malignancy. So, you know, I keep trusting God. I don't know what He has in store for me. And even to go back to Carrie's incident, when you asked the question about whether she thought of, you know, death as an option, not once did that thought ever come through my mind. Because I knew there isn't a time, even today, that I do not cover my children and my grandchildren at the beginning of the day with the blood of Jesus. And every night that I could hear them and speak to them, I thank Him for His watchful eyes over them. It is the only thing that I could do for my children, to place them in the safe keeping. I can't protect them like He could. You know, and even when that happened, you know, the night I was saying my prayers, because, like I said, I didn't cry or anything. But in praying that night, I was so distraught. And I said, Lord, I ask that you draw them close to you. But I didn't ask for this. And right away, I ask His forgiveness for challenging Him. You know, and I say, you know, whatever you do is always the best way. You know, and that was not easy thing to cope with them, but it was the only thing that I could hold on to at the time. You know, and if those of you here, if you have children and grandchildren, I mean, I know for those of us who know the Lord, it is easy to say and follow. Sometimes not so easy. But you ever stop to think about those who don't know the Lord, what their lives might be like? And like I was saying today, it's such a great day to share this story. Easter is about new beginnings and the rebirth. And what a time for to share a story like this.
Amen. I couldn't have said it better. I don't think any of us could have said it better. You know, I've been talking about the book, and it is here, From Lion to Lamb. The price is $13.95. However, if you get it today, it'll only take a $10 bill. So there's about 30 books over there. So I would encourage you to get one for yourself, get one for somebody else, because you're not going to want to give yours away. Nobody's getting my book. Dan, thank you so much for the, feeling that little push in the back to give me a call. And, because you're right, this morning I couldn't think of a better way than to start Good Friday and a great Fellowship Friday. Thanks to you, Carrie and Lynette. Thank you. Dan, would you come up, have prayer for us? We have about 20-25 minutes left. Instead of going around and all that, just mix and mingle. I'm sure you have questions to ask. Oh yeah. Eat the food. Eat the food. It's all there. I know most of us don't mind eating a carb or two, except for Sue and Ricky. So eat their carbs while you're at it. So please.
I ate the fruit.
Go ahead.
Before I pray, I'd like to just share something with you that occurred to me when my sister said at my age. It was 43 years ago this weekend. I remember wondering at 6 years old about the ever-presence of God. I know she probably wouldn't remember that, but my sister picked us up and took us